Government keynote, Miss Ellen Lord, the Honorable Ellen Lord, who currently serves as the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. And in that role, she reports to the Secretary of Defense on all matters for, as you can imagine, acquisition and sustainment. So she works very closely with the services and the military agencies in this role. And she was my boss for about a year when I was in federal service, and she's continued to do great work. Prior to this appointment, she spent 30 years toiling in industry, working, her last role was as President and CEO of Textron Systems Corporations. Has been at over 30 years. She was the Vice Chair of NDIA and has held numerous board and steering group positions during that time. So it's really, it's an honor to have you here, Ms. Lord, and thanks very much for your time. So one of the things is we're starting now, we're in October 3, and we're at the start of a fiscal year, albeit we're CR'd. So what are some of the priorities that you're working on for this coming fiscal year?
Great. Well, first of all, Jerry, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about some of my favorite subjects here. And our team spent a lot of time in July and August really focusing on FY 2020 and what we wanted to get accomplished. Back in 2018, we were really working through the reorganization of AT&L, and now this year and next year are really our opportunities to get some work done. So we came up with 6 key objectives, and the first one is really enabling acquisition innovation. We've had an enormous number of authorities that Congress has given us. The challenge is translating those into policies and instructions that really make a difference. And I believe that the acquisition workforce has been challenged in the past by a lot of laws that they need to interpret, and the DoD policy sometimes isn't quite as clear or concise as it might be. So we've worked, Kevin Fahey, the ASD for acquisition, and his team very closely with the services to come up with what we call an adaptive acquisition framework. So we understand that there are lots of different types of acquisitions, a lot of different timelines, and we want to make sure that there are very clear choices that can be made. So for instance, I think you might have spoken a little bit already today about other transaction authorities. A great capability that we really codified into policy last year, came up with a training system at the Defense Acquisition University for, and it's allowing us to get out there when there isn't a key requirement, and we want to work very quickly, especially with small companies, to get on contract. We are really building on that right now, and we are just finishing what's called the middle tier of acquisition policy. The idea being here that quite often you have a portion of a larger system, a weapon system, some type of platform perhaps, that is not as technically mature as it needs to be, and it would really bog down the whole acquisition process once you got into a major defense acquisition program. So middle tier acquisition allows you to rapidly prototype and rapidly field, with the idea being you leave that capability in the field, you get it into warfighters' hands very, very quickly so that they can experiment with it to see what works and what doesn't work. When you use middle tier acquisition, you don't have to go through the joint staff requirements process. It takes about 2 years out of the process. So we want to write the policy and the instructions to be able to use that. Another area we're really focusing on in terms of our acquisition innovation are software paths. One of our greatest challenges right now in the department is we have not embraced modern software development methodology, and almost all of our systems use software. So we have recognized the fact that software is different from hardware. We are embracing Agile and DevOps to quickly develop, produce, and sustain code. But what we have found is, frankly, our business systems are not innovating at the same pace that technology is. So we're coming up with software pathways. We have a whole number of different things we're doing on the acquisition side, but unless we train the workforce to use those capabilities, it really doesn't mean much. So that leads into another one of our 6 objectives, is to attract, develop, and retain a very talented workforce. In order to do that, we have to make sure that they understand all the tools they have. And unfortunately, I think because of all the oversight we tend to have in the Department of Defense, we have driven our acquisition professionals to be incredibly risk averse in the past, because it's extremely unpleasant when things don't go well and you get hauled up on the hill for a hearing with TV cameras in your face, and you get a lot of media attention. So what we're committed to doing is making sure we explain very clearly what the acquisition choices are, and what we're trying to do is drive what I call creative compliance. Make sure you know what is legal, what isn't, and make sure you do everything in your capability to move as quickly and as cost effectively as possible. So in order to do that, we're changing things up a little bit at the Defense Acquisition University, and Jim Woolsey over here is our great partner in that he's really transitioning DAU from being more of a type of lecture type situation, push a lot of knowledge, to break down what we have in terms of knowledge that we need to impart into smaller modules, smaller programs, so people get the information they need at the time of need. So that you can go and take a half-a-day course on digital engineering. You can take a half-a-day course on how do you write contracts for contracting for Agile or DevOps. So a lot of things we're trying to do in terms of paint this framework and train people for it. We also know that it's just not the government doing this. It's a very, very critical partnership with the defense industrial base. So our third objective in what we're doing is to build both a secure and resilient defense industrial base. And I think you've had some discussions this morning about how critical addressing cybersecurity is. Also, we have fragilities in our defense industrial base because there's not always a very strong business case for some of the critical technologies, hardware, software that we need, that there's not a large demand signal for. So what we are doing is leveraging, again, authorities Congress has given us, such as Defense Production Act Title III, IBAS, some other things, to fund companies to allow them to get going and get through that valley of death, or as one of my team called it this morning, the Valley of China, where we often invest in a lot of capability in universities and research labs, and then these small companies have a hard time transitioning to really be self-sufficient. We are starting up a trusted capital marketplace to be able to fund these companies so that they're not swooped up by money from China and so forth. And then just very briefly, we want to make sure that we have very secure installations, again, under sustainment. And everybody says acquisition, and they forget that big A acquisition is little a acquisition and sustainment, because 70 to 80 cents on the dollar for every major system we buy goes into sustainment. So we want to make sure we sustain those installations, that they're secure, that they're energy resilient if the grid goes down. We also want to make sure our weapon systems are very cyber secure. So we are partnering like never before with the Intel community, really taking the information they're gaining and bringing it back to the operator, to the point of need, so that we can make our systems very, very robust. So those are our key objectives, probably more than you wanted to know, but I'm kind of excited about what we're doing.
Great, that's tremendous, that's tremendous. Yeah, one of the topics that you touched on in the beginning on middle-tier acquisition, we had a panel earlier where we talked about new approaches to federal contracting, and it was a lot about OTs and about adapting the FAR 809 panel. But one general question about like the work that's going on with middle-tier acquisition and these other innovative approaches. The question that sort of that leads to is that we're doing a lot to innovate and prototype and more rapid prototyping. But how is that going to lead to production programs? Or is the model of traditional programs of record, is that need to change? And then how's the current system, which is sort of acquisition systems, which is set up to really do MDAPs, to do major programs, how does that need to be adapted? And what are the kind of things you're doing?
So overall, what we're trying to do is speed up the acquisition process and make it very cost effective. Part of that is making sure the defense industrial base knows how to work with us. That's why I always think of our industrial policy team as the big help desk for industry. Want them to call in, and we're partnering all the time with a lot of the major industry associations, PSC, NDIA, AIA. Now we're reaching out to the National Association of Manufacturers more, the chamber, and telling them about what we're doing. But we are not really stepping away from programs of record. What we are trying to do is bring the risk down for programs of record by prototyping technology early on, prototyping back like R&E after the split of AT&L with research and engineering. They are prototyping technology to ensure it can deliver the capability. We then want to move forward, and before we get into a program of record, take critical subsystems, components of larger systems, and prototype them into an application and put them in the warfighter's hands to make sure that that capability is actually delivered the way we envisioned it, and really shake out the risk and therefore the cost before you come into a program of record. So we see a lot of pathways into 5,000 at either milestone B or C using middle tier acquisition. So it's not that we're really moving away from major defense programs or moving away from 5,000. We are de-risking and speeding up and cost reducing it by using all these other flexibilities up in front of it.
Okay, that's fascinating. You talked about how you're educating the acquisition workforce, working, and DAU is our co-host for this effort. And one of the themes that sort of come out of the discussion is that is a culture change. How do you get, because as one of your predecessors, Frank Kendall, he inadvertently said LPTA once, and that became a whole culture, that changed the culture in one direction. But
we just put a DFAR out so to disabuse everyone of the notion that LPTAs are good across, because from my point of view, LPTAs are great for commodities, when you're buying paper towels and things like that, but anything value add, it's a race to the bottom, so we don't want that.
No, absolutely. The question is, how do you, some of the things you're trying to do with middle tier acquisition and de-risking, how do you get that message down to the contracting officers, the folks that are actually writing the contracts, and that, because it's getting that down.
No, you've nailed it, because I will tell you, every extremely problematical program I work with has an extremely problematical contract along with it. And the root cause of that, I believe, is that our acquisition workforce has not always had all the tools they need and the insight they need. So what we're doing, first of all, is partnering very, very closely with the services and the agencies. The first time I went to what's called a senior leader conference, which is when the Secretary of Defense brings all the COCOMs, all the service chiefs, all the OSD leads together. First time I went to one in fall of 17 and presented, I was talking about the facts and figures of what we do in acquisition. So, we have spent a lot of time in the past thinking about our little world as a triangle, with acquisition and sustainment just right on top of that little point, and the rest of the world down below us. And it was our almost, religious right to oversee everything. And I said, I see that 180 degrees differently. With my industry background, I always tend to look at everything as, who is my customer? And it's very, very clear to me that in all of OSD and in ANS, the warfighter is our customer. And it's my job to enable the warfighter to get capability downrange as efficiently and as cost effectively as possible. So what we really need to do is make sure that we are shortening that time from a requirement being set to a contract being let to make things happen. So when we have been developing the new policies and instructions under the adaptive acquisition framework, it isn't as if ANS has been sitting in a corner kind of making this all up by ourselves. I hold a bi-weekly meeting with each together. They're all together with the service acquisition executives. I also meet on the off week one-on-one with the service acquisition executives. And I talk with them all the time about what we're trying to do and how we try to do it and what we should be doing more of, less of, start doing, stop doing. So they are a part of all of this. And then what we're doing is making sure we are explaining what we're doing to the larger acquisition community. So, for instance, week before last, we held a forum at the Defense Acquisition University where we had most of the service PEOs and we had some of our highest performing program managers. And what we brought to them were real life examples of what the challenges were and what the problems were. We had PEOs get up and talk about their programs, what was working, what wasn't. We then also had a little bit of fun with standing up with some of our new capabilities and calling on people to say how they would use them. So we had a little experiential learning, if you will. And then at the end of the day, I was kicked off in the morning, and then of course I got sucked back into the Pentagon for the next 8 hours or so. But I went back at the end of the day, and instead of summarizing to everybody what they heard, I decided that I was going to go around the room, give everybody the microphone to tell us what they needed from us. And that was an incredibly rich compilation of what PMs and PEOs need. And it ranged from just basic communications, which I frankly think is the thread that runs through everything we all do. We never communicate enough. We forget that engineers like everything emailed or texted to them so they don't have to talk. And others, want to hear from you on the phone. Others want it eyeball to eyeball. So you have to kind of keep talking in lots of different ways, communicating, writing, and so forth. So we got back basic communications wants. We got back some very basic questions of, help me understand how your team is organized. Like, great opportunity. We've reorganized in the last year. We thought we had communicated that, but obviously not. So we need to more effectively push that out. And then we found some much more specific things we needed to do. But the basic challenge here is communication with the workforce and making sure they have online access to the tools they need and that they have the opportunity to come and take part in courses with other leaders and get to establish really a network and a trusted network of people that they can call or email and say, hey, I'm having this problem. Have you seen it? What would you do? And it's on us to make sure we capture real live business cases because someone telling someone what someone else did is not particularly effective. It's much more effective to have somebody there in the flesh and said, oh my God, I had this program and we went to PDR and oh my God, this is what happened and don't ever do this again. We tend to like to talk about all the good stuff we did. It's human nature to kind of put that bad stuff away. We need to talk about what didn't work so we don't condemn everyone else to make the exact same mistakes. So we're trying to do a lot of that interaction, and Jim and his team are capturing lots on video. We've done some really innovative things we licensed TED Talks, and we had TEDx DAU and had people stand up and give presentations. So we're trying to be a little bit more contemporary.
Great, great, super. I mean, by your comments, and we've actually got a panel this afternoon talking about workforce. Workforce is the lifeblood of government and of the companies that support the government. And one of the things that you and I both have perspective being in government and in industry. I've been on both sides, but there's sort of the incentive structure is not set up to really increase the number of exchanges or ability for folks to move between government and industry. And I'm one that's actually a firm believer in the importance of the revolving door. It makes the government a better customer. It makes the industry a much more informed kind of a solicitor to respond to requirements. So can you talk a little bit about some of the things you're trying to do to help
Absolutely. I am 100% behind you. This is an ecosystem with industry and government. Government's better when government employees have spent time in industry and vice versa. So after 33 years in industry, when I came into the building, one of the biggest shocks I had was I looked around for my finance person and I looked around for my HR person because I was used to everybody who ran the P&Ls, if you will, and then your two key support people. And I looked and looked, and then I finally realized they weren't there because structurally we didn't do that. So the finance thing is a whole nother issue that we've addressed. But on the HR side, what I found was HR in the DoD has devolved in large part to personnel people. And why is that? Because there are so many laws we have to comply with that most of our HR professionals have really become compliance officers. So we don't have that ability to get things going. So we had to start using a lot of different ways to get at the HR issue. So one of the things that we've chosen to do is continue to work with the Hill to make sure the acquisition workforce has the special authorities that we've had in the past, and we luckily still have. We have some authorities called ACDEMO, DWIA, DAUDF. Basically, all these different areas allow us to hire directly sometimes so that we don't have to go through the competition, because one of the kind of the dirty little secrets of government employment is there are so many hoops to go through that it takes, on a good day, 6 months to bring someone from the outside into government. And to move people around inside is challenging as well. So you literally wear people down before you ever get them in the door.
It took me 10 months through USA Jobs to go into government.
And you know, most human beings aren't even aware that USA Jobs exists. I had never heard of it before. So what we're doing is trying to be a little bit more contemporary, using some of these authorities and really getting the word out through our networks when we have jobs available. We're using these authorities to hire people in quickly. We are using funding we have to train people, because often the programs can't afford to do that. But most importantly, we have begun some exchange programs with the acquisition workforce. This is not for the faint of heart because of all the laws out there. So we have partnered with the legal team, and just this past year, we had a great exchange with industry individuals coming over into government. And these are real jobs. It's not like go sit in the corner kind of thing. And government people going to industry. And we use the industry associations to facilitate that. And I was fairly involved midway through, and that had a final dinner so I could really talk to everybody, invite the CEOs in from the companies that participated, invite the principals from the government. And what was incredible was to hear the industry people say, I can't believe what it takes to get an RFP out. I can't believe what the source selection process is like. And then a mirror image, the government people saying, oh my God, I can't believe what it takes to put a proposal together. So incredible learnings that allow us to go back and have, people walk in one another's shoes and better understand their point of view. We need to do more and more of that. We're also using some special job codes, if you will. Another thing that was fascinating to me coming to the government, I'm used to direct and indirect people in industry, and then different grade levels, so exempt and non-exempt, and they're different grade levels. We have about 25 flavors of employees within DoD, just that we deal with. So you have career and non-career civilians, you have NH4s, you have SESs, and then you have IPAs, and you have HQEs and SGEs. So what does all that mean? My concern is that if you not only take 6 to 9 months to get people in, but also to move people around if it's outside of your direct authority. We know that technology is moving quickly. We know that business practices are moving quickly. So people that have had a career in the government typically are not going to have the new cutting edge, 10% that's critical to us. So we are leveraging a job classification called highly qualified employees, where we can bring people in for about 5 years with an option for 1 more year. Then they time out so that we can get these cutting edge skills and bring people in quickly. It is a maze to use those authorities, but we're learning how to do that. And what I would really like to stress is, and DARPA has done this very, very well, it is an awesome thing for the individual, for the government, and for industry to have individuals come in for 2 to 5 years, get an amazing array of experience, use that, and go back out into industry. Because although I'm up here whining about all these administrative challenges we have, once you're in the door, what you are exposed to once you're inside the DoD is absolutely amazing. And your ability at a relatively low level to have a significant impact on programs that are directly tied to our national defense, and your ability to be there with the hardware, be there with the leadership, is unparalleled. The amount of exposure you get is amazing. And the government also is incredibly generous with education. So most of our senior employees have their masters thanks to the government. They've gone to all these programs that people in industry would salivate to go to. So the barrier to entry can be high, but once you're in, it's pretty cool. And I think that what I would love to see is people go in and out, because it's a travesty when you don't have an HR process that is developing and retaining people. Because, not infrequently, I run across people who say, I have 30 years here at DoD. Trouble is, they have 30 years at DoD, but they have 3 years experience 10 times over. And we've got to do a much better job with our civilian workforce of making sure they get the experiential learning from moving to job. And right now, the administrative systems don't make it easy to have people to move from job to job.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. One quick question from the audience before we have to wrap up. A couple of questions around the issues of you're talking about military acquisition and how how does it impact the 5000 series? How's it going to align with the things you're doing on Agile and DevSecOps? And are they different than what was tried during the David Packer era?
Okay, so a couple different pieces there. Let's unpack that. From a software point of view of Agile and DevOps, I wish we could get to that in hardware, but we're not quite there. I think of our systems as hardware enabled, but software defined. And we're trying to use Agile and DevOps to make sure we continually upgrade that software. Now, we get into a challenge when you're really doing Agile and DevOps and you're developing, producing, and sustaining, testing all the time with different colors of money, because we all go to jail if we use the wrong color of money. So we're working with the Hill to try to get some broader authority to use RDT&E for the short term across all 3 different lines of effort. That can be applied to any type of program at any time. So that is like a Venn diagram coming into middle tier or 5,000, but it doesn't define it at all. With the middle tier, again, what we're trying to do is look at perhaps commercial technology that just needs to be hardened and have a few different things done to it to really militarize it and quickly get it out in the field. With middle tier acquisition, the beauty is that the service or the component lead could say, I have a requirement for X, Y, Z. That, if it's clearly defined and the lead of that organization says it, the program, unless it's a huge, complex program, does not have to go through the joint staff for the JSIDS process. So we can get going and take 2 years out of programs to mature something. Now, often there might be a sensing system or a portion of a weapon system that is a component of a much larger system. We can mature that through a middle tier acquisition, and then we could come in at milestone B or milestone C with that to the 5,000 program. So there is going to be a limit to the complexity and the financial magnitude of programs that can be middle tier acquisition. But a lot can go through it. And the idea is to buy down the risk in terms of technology risk, schedule risk, and cost risk by bringing high TRL components and subsystems into these major platforms by using middle tier. It also goes back to what if we have a military capability already out there and we have a war-fighting gap that if we just modified that fielded system a little bit might work. That's again when you use middle tier. So it's to get out and have the experiential learning by the warfighter more quickly. We will still have 5,000 programs, but we're trying to do as many middle tier as possible. If you can get fielded within 5 years, and that's a sustainable capability, and you don't need to do more of it, you might not have a major program, but often critical large programs will go a little bit longer.
Great. Well, listen, I've got about 10 more questions, but we're out of time. It's been wonderful to have you here, Ms. Lord. Thank you very much for your service to our country and to the Department of Defense. And it's been great to have you here. So
Great.
thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah. All right. Thank you all very much.